Morning, everyone, and it's this is quite a day for me anyway, and I think for all of us, because this is not only our first in person, but our first Zoom. We've finally got a great setup here at the shop where I can see you guys and I can see what's going on the camera, and you know, the technology from my viewpoint is taking a whole leap forward, and I can see the chat. So as long as I take a moment to read it, then it's I can look at that. But I think people will still have to interrupt me with the chat. So it's cool to see you and to know who's on, because to be honest, up to this point, I've been here and we haven't had the technology to where I can see all your faces or even your names. So hey, Tom. So, you know, I welcome you all, and I think this is going to be great. It's funny, I mentioned last time that we'd probably do block planes for our next, do something about block planes for our next SIG. Obviously, someone from Fine Woodworking was listening to me, because they at the very last minute, they held the front page and they put in an article about block planes in this month's this month's Fine Woodworking, and there's two articles actually. One is about 7 different ways to use your block plane, which we'll go into a little bit, and another one is about tuning your block plane up. So I was actually planning to, until I received that, I was planning to show you an article from 1996 in Fine Woodworking, which also goes into tuning up block planes. So I will I'll do my own thing, but I just want to tell you that there are, you know, Fine Woodworker does cyclic or periodic, comes back to this subject just like I do. And they have these good articles about tuning up your block plane and how to use it. So the block plane is the one plane that I would, you know, even though I'm a hand tool nut, I don't consider myself to be that much of a Luddite. You know, I appreciate all the machinery that we have, and I appreciate the labor saving, and believe me, I wouldn't try to plane a 15-inch wide piece of wood except here in the shop using our planer. But the block plane is one of those tools that it's nice and handy. It can be really small. It can fit in a pocket. We're moving the camera a little bit there, but it's nice and small. It can fit in a pocket, and you can use it even if you're doing working machine work. How many times have you come across an end that's a little raggedy or whatever? You can just run along and put a chamfer there and turn it into a really smooth looking piece of wood. They're very, very simple. They are generally bevel up. I'm going to take one to pieces in a minute. So they generally bevel up, and they generally have a much lower angle of attack, as it were, because of that bevel up, in terms of where the blade sits in the plane. The difference between a regular plane, I mean, I'm talking about the normal bench plane type with a 45-degree angle frog, is that the angle it's bevel up, and what that does is it brings the angle of the actual cutting angle to very similar to what you have, just 2-3 degrees away from what you have in a normal bench plane, but they perform in a very different way due to a few nice little aspects of their construction. So what I'm going to do today is right now, I'm just going to show you one of the things that people often miss in using a block plane, or often don't think about, is that, you know, we as woodworkers, if we want to get a finish that isn't sanded, we look for a really, really neat smoothing plane. Well, most of us have one right there in our shops. We have a little block plane of some kind or another, and this little guy can be set to give me these lovely thin shavings. This is a little coarse, so I'll back it off a little bit, see if we can get thinner than that. You can see these are actual shavings, but I'm taking out these super, super thin shavings here. So I can really work out, you know, when you've finished planing a surface and there are still some little ridges, you can go back in and, you know, you can smooth a whole surface with this, but you can go back and clean out those little ridges with a block plane. They're also great for if you're bandsawing wood and then bringing it to a 90-degree edge. They're great for that finish. After you've done it with a jointer, you can just go along and make sure that it's all at 90 degrees and not 90.5 degrees all the way along your edge there. So I'm going to get rid of the wood for the moment. But I just wanted to demonstrate. Oh, before I move on, one of the features of many block planes is that they have a movable shoe. I think it's called a shoe. I can't remember the name. It's in that article, but I'll demonstrate. It's movable. And the reason to move it is that if you're wanting very, very fine shavings, the gap between the edge of your mouth and your blade wants to be as small as possible. So if you're getting very, very fine shavings, you don't want the blade to go down much. You want, when you press down, you want to just get a nice shaving. So that's one of the big advantages. But at the same time, it only takes a moment to go out to a bigger gap for a coarser cut. So it's a very flexible little tool. So I'm going to, rather than take the top of the line, and if you're going to invest money in a block plane, I will unashamedly recommend this brand. It's just, really, really good quality, but it's basically a derivation of a Stanley design. And today we're going to work on a Stanley design this is the other very popular. This is called a 60.5, and it's a pretty low angle cut. This is a number 9.5, and this is an original Stanley. This is probably from the 1930s or 40s. It has the advantage that that other one, you have to move the blade by hand, so you have to loosen off the adjustment, the tightness, move the blade, check it, and then tighten up again. With this, you've got a lever here that you can adjust the lateral on that, and this is the way you go in and out in terms of moving the blade in and out. And again, it has that movable mouth. So you can get this one down to actually a much smaller gap than you can with the Lie-Nielsen. So either I've got to look at the Lie-Nielsen and see if I can improve the gap on that, but it works beautifully, so maybe I don't need to. This one is looking a bit out at the moment because I've been sort of prepping it for what we're going to do today. So I'm going to go through the motions of tuning up or restoring to some degree, anyway, at least restoring the mechanical usage of a block plane. So this is an old one I bought at the swap meet, the hand tool swap meet, or not hand tool, old tool swap meet. I think I paid about $15 for it, and it was, pretty rough looking when I got it. And I just really cleaned it up, tuned it up, and got it going. And I've been using it for 3 or 4 years. And I thought, for the purposes of this demonstration, I would tune this baby up, because as you can see, it's not been heavily worn, but it's definitely got some wear on the bottom there. So let's go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is, on this piece of wood here, I will dismantle the plane to show you the component parts. So one of the first things to show you is this funky thing. I should take the time to go look at the magazine and remember the name. So this is removable. And this is the part that moves back and forth to the movable mouth, as it were. So this is part of the tune-up.
Yeah,
but
say that there's the throat.
Sorry?
Doug is citing it's a throat.
It's a throat. Oh, down in here. Yeah. Oh, I put my finger on a blade there. Didn't cut myself, thank goodness. Okay, so I'm going to put that baby back in eventually, but those are the parts to do with that. Then, unlike many, like some planes that we use, it's a pretty easy dismantling process because there's no chip breaker as such. You have this acts as the chip breaker. It's the something cap. This is the iron itself, all by itself. Doesn't have the chip breaker attached to it. So, and it sets with the back downwards in the plane, so that So it's the bevel is up, as it were, which is what it's called. And this is how it moves from side to side using that lever. Is using a little, this little circle here, which moves back and forth. So there's that. And I'm not going to dismantle this, but if you're tuning up one of these planes, one way to, you know how most planes have whiplash in them to some degree or another, where, you know, when you back it off, you have to, you know, when you back the plane up, you have to turn the wheel maybe sometimes a couple of times before it starts to move in the opposite direction. Same can happen with this, but you can reduce that option, that possibility, by taking a pair of pliers or a vise and bringing these two jaws closer together so that they just touch this little adjusting wheel here. So that's part of the tune-up. I'm not going to take this wheel off because it takes a minute or so to take it to pieces, but you know, I can take all these component parts out. I can undo this screw here and take off the lever, and if I need to, you know, if I've accidentally bent it too far down or whatever, I can rebend it. So in order to actually start the physical actions of tuning up, I'm going to put it back together, and we'll be taking it apart again to show you some of the tuning up. But I'm going to put it back together first. I'm going to put it back together in such a way that the blade is not going through the bottom of the plane. I want the blade to be in place, and I want the plane to be as if it were ready to work. And that's because when I do this clip, it puts tension throughout the whole body of the plane. So if I want this, well, the next step I'm going to do is to flatten the surface of the bottom of this plane. And to do that, I'm going to put my thingy bob back in here.
I looked at the article, they call it a shoe.
And put this adjusting device, which is a little slightly eccentric adjuster. I'm not sure what you'd call it in mechanical terms. Now I've got to jiggle. So when you're using a block plane for all these different things, being able to adjust it easily is really nice. The reason this is another reason that being able to adjust the mouth here is really nice is that it's that quick. If you need to adjust your relation of the blade to the mouth here, with a regular plane, you have to take the blade off, and then, or very often take the blade off in order to release the frog and adjust the frog. Although it has an adjuster that you can see, you've got to release it. So you've got to take the blade out. You've got to do all those things in order to adjust it. Whereas with this, the primary adjustments are obviously the lateral adjustment, back and forth. So the way the blade goes in and out of the, well, try and get that 45 degrees. There you go. And where the mouth is. And those are my big adjustments, and they can make huge differences in the way the thing performs and what you're using it for. So I'm going to do this up. I'm going to make sure it's nice and tight, so that this becomes, in essence, the same surface. Right. So I can actually, if I weren't looking, I probably wouldn't feel.
No, on Monday.
On there. This plane is in pretty good shape already, I imagine, but because I've been using it. But so I'm sorry, Chris, I've been facing away from you. I'm so used to doing things the old way, but you can see anyway, can't you? Yeah, so maybe I should just continue. But okay, so I'm also I'm sorry, excuse me for a moment. I'm going to take a dodge around you here. Okay, I don't have what I wanted to. I wanted to introduce to you a component of our new sharpening system at the shop. We're going to be teaching this in our sharpening class, the first of which I'm doing tomorrow. But we have invested in some, it's not new technology, but we're in a diamond plate that I'm going to demonstrate for you in a minute. It has a 300 grit on one side and a 1000 grit on the other. And if you use an 8,000 ceramic stone with that, that is pretty much all you need to sharpen and shape and get at least sharp your chisels. Then you move on to the 8,000 stone. But the nice thing about this 300 is that you can flatten your stones on it. So I've only got ceramic stones with me today, but you can essentially, and you can do this with ceramic stones as well, flatten it on this 300 diamond plate. It does it nice and quick. You don't need to set it up, set up something that gets all, tremendously wet. So this is like the coarse, and then the medium, and then the 8,000 is the fine. And that is what we're going to be keeping it to in terms of hand sharpening program, at least. And I'll be teaching in the class tomorrow how we how to sharpen a chisel using these. But anyway, so the first thing I need to do is to make this flat, and somewhere around, I know I've got what I need is a permanent marker. I thought I had one of those. That is annoying. I've forgotten it. I'm sorry, folks. Okay, so what we do is what we're going to try to do is we need for this area here to be really nice and flat, and this area here, if this is flat and this here is flat, doesn't matter so much about being flat in the back here. We want it to be reasonably flat right at the back here. So the first thing that we do normally is to take a straight edge. Ideally,
You want me to get you a marker?
sorry?
You want me to get you a marker from the shop? Black marker?
Sure, yeah.
Let me just set this here for a moment.
Okay, yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'll go through this. I know I had some. I thought they were in that box, but sorry about that, folks. Okay, I think that's the first time I've ever been out without one of my props. So the first thing that I'm going to do, try to get in picture here, is take a look at the bottom of this with I've backed up my plane so it's not coming, my blade, so it's not coming through the bottom. And I'm going to look against the light with a really straight edge. I'm going to look at it that way. I'm going to look at it that way. Again, check along various points, especially at the mouth. And then I'm going to also go diagonal. And if I can see any light through there, then I'm up the creek and I need to flatten this. So superb, right? So that's the eyeball way to do it. And then just let me make sure my blade is back up there. Then what I'm going to do, what I do with almost all planes, thank you, Paul, I really appreciate that, is I'm going to, the tune-up book only recommends putting ink here, but I like to do the whole thing because I like to know what the whole of the sole looks like. And especially if you're new at this, it really pays to have the permanent marker. I could do this myself without permanent marker because I can tell where and you will in a minute, you'll be able to see where the difference is between the newly cut surfaces and these edges. I mean, I'm sorry, and the newly cut surfaces and then the parts that haven't been. So using our new map from Norton that they donated to us, I'm going to put just a little bit of water on that, just a sprinkling. And I'm going to just do a few strokes with my plane here. So I'm going to use it. The important thing is not to put too much weight or emphasis on one side or the other. So, pretty much the way you'd use a plane, you want to make sure that you've got even force on all of it. I can see some of the permanent ink. You can see even after just a couple of strokes, you can see that there's at least a couple of high points because it's worn off there and it's worn off there. And that means that I don't have a totally flat blade. So I'm going to just work this for a minute.
What is the grit of that stone?
And you can see that it's, again, more of a high point there, more of a high point there. And I'm going to guess that the reason for that is because I have a tendency to use my plane across the wood like that and or run it like this. So maybe that's one reason why it's a diagonal wear pattern. I don't know. So I'm going to have to work this a little bit more. If this is about 300 grit, if you find that it's going really slow with 300 grit, then what you do is you get a piece of sandpaper attached to a piece of granite or glass, or even the bed of a tool like a jointer that's just really nice and flat. Don't get water on your jointer bed though, because it'll get rusty, but you know, you can do the sanding dry. So if you need to go to a coarser grit in order to tune this up, then that's just great. But you know, and you should do, because all you're doing is removing metal. So you want to do it with the coarsest possible grit. In this case, this is all I have here. I'm going to work this for a couple of minutes. Sometimes it takes a little while, but you know, you work that. You see all that black stuff there? That's not the permanent marker. That's metal sometimes. And you notice that I'm moving around. I'm trying to use all of the plates so that I don't wear out. The diamonds are very, very hard wearing and long wearing, but I don't want to wear it all out at the same time. I mean, wear sections of it out at the same time. And we use whatever rag we have to hand, which in my case is a mask. And you can see that a mask doesn't do a very good job at cleaning. Oh, a rag, which of course I had with me, and you know,
It was hidden.
I had thought ahead. You can see that most of the permanent marker has gone. There's a high point here, there's a high point still here, it's beginning to grind here, so it wasn't very high at all. You know, when you consider this is equivalent to the 320 sandpaper that you use to sand between coats on.
Better angle because of reflection there.
Oh, right. Okay. There you can see that reflection nicely. But you can see it's, you know, every little while you can look at it and see that you've worked it. So I'm going to take off some of this crap that's built up in here. And give a little more water. I really do. I'm not just plugging this. This silicone mat, whatever you use, I like this silicone mat because it's got grip and it doesn't, the water doesn't go through it, and it's got a texture that actually keeps a few drops of water on the mat, so it's not even going to roll off. So, and I can even go round and round. You know, you just do what is comfortable for you. The important thing is to keep a nice even pressure on the front and back of the plane.
The question is, what is the grit of the stone that you're currently on?
Good question. I'll give you a close up here. I'll tell you. It's 300 on this side, and again, nicely, it's marked 1000 on that side. And I know that for many of us, and myself included, it seems like anathema to go from a very coarse to a medium and straight to a super fine. You know, we're all taught in Palomar or wherever to go up through the grits and to progress there. And especially with wood, that really matters. It makes a huge difference. But with metal, it's not so, and especially small areas of metal like on a block plane, it's not so critical because although you have some deep scratches here, comparatively deep scratches, the 1000 diamond plate will take this off very easily. And then if I were wanting to polish this, it would be easy to polish at 8000. And this is not just my wacky idea. If you ever see the sharpening demonstrations at Lee Nielsen events, the first one I saw where he jumped from 1000 to 10,000 grit, I said, what are you doing? And he said, look, there's so little metal here that you just do a little extra work, and compared to the extra cost of, you know, buying that in-between stone, it's just not worth it. You just do a little bit more work, and you don't do this very often. You know, you set this plane up every few years. So let me work it a little bit more. Any other questions? What's the grit of the stone? Shoe. All right, we'll call that movable part the shoe. I like that name. Not a toe. It's interesting how a lot of plane things relate to the foot, don't they? The sole, the toe, the shoe. Where the hell the tote came from, I have no idea. The other big advantage of a block plane is you can use it one-handed, especially the smaller ones. And that's really nice. And it's small enough to keep in an apron. If you go with an old one like this that you don't have a lot of money in, if you go to a wood yard and you're buying rough wood and you want to see what the grain is like underneath, if you ask the folks at the yard, they won't mind if you're just playing a little bit off. You just have to ask. Okay. The critical part I'm looking for is to get this here to be ground down. And I don't know if I'm going to have time to do it, so I may have to move on, but I've shown you the basic principle. I'm going to work it just a little more. But I really don't want to hang you guys up just watching me doing a lot of this. So this is something you want to set aside an hour and a half for at least. With this one, when I go home, I'm probably going to set this up with something like 220 sandpaper. I've got some wet and dry 220 sandpaper at home, and I'm going to truly flatten this, get it completely flat. I'm getting close, but you know, and maybe another 5-10 minutes would get me there. But as something that I only do every few years, I'm going to get this baby flat. You'd be amazed when you're looking to take shavings of 1/1000 of an inch or less. You would be amazed at what a difference just flattening this. You know, you're looking at tiny tolerances. So if your machine, as it were, is machined to a really nice flat surface, that makes a tremendous difference in the shaving that you take. So rather than work that baby too much, the next thing we'll do is we'll move on to tuning up the rest. Because, you know, you could sit and watch me for another 10-15 minutes and do this, or you could get on with your lives. And, you know, not be bored watching me do that. So, okay. I put the whole plane together because I want it to be in tension. Now that I've dealt with my issues on the, we're going to assume we're going to play that I now have a perfectly flat surface down here. I would probably take it over to the 1000 just because I'm a little persnickety, but it's not necessary. This doesn't have to be a polished surface. All it's got to be is flat. But the finer it is, the smoother it's going to slide over your wood, and the less gummy it's going to get if you put something on it. So I would probably go to 1000, but I'm not going to take that up to an 8000 grit. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I polished this. I mean, I've got this, it's fully flat. And I want to, at this point, because I've flattened this whole bottom here, it's going to have some very, very clean edges. So I'm going to just take a sandpaper, piece of diamond plate, whatever it is, and just ease the arrows on those edges there, because we've talked in previous meetings where a 90-degree edge can be turned into a blade, and that's exactly what you can do to this edge. So you go pick it up and you've got a nice clean slice along your fingertip there, which, you know how annoying that is when you're trying to work with hand tools. So you want to just take all of those surfaces that have now been round flat, just ease that Aris so you can run your finger along there. And at the same time, you may feel some dings. This guy's been around for close to 100 years, so it's got a little ding there. It's got a couple of little dings, but nothing that affects the performance of the piece, as it were. So I've done my arises here, so now I don't have those very sharp spots there. And the next thing I'm going to do is to clean up the shoe a little bit. There's not much to do. We know it's already been made flat on the bottom. It does have very sharp edges now because it's flat. So again, I could just do, and this is 400 grit sandpaper, just do a little like that, right? The important part is this part here where the mouth. We don't want to have any little shavings, any little edges on that, because that can affect the shaving. It'll give you instead of a clean shaving, it'll give you a fuzzy shaving. What this part does, the mouth, is just before the blade cuts it, it compresses the wood fibers slightly, and then they bounce back up again after it passes over. So again, having it be perfectly flat here is pretty critical. And you want it to not have any little snags on that edge to make your shaving get messed up. So we can do a couple of things. In this case, all I really want to do is clean this up. So I could use my sandpaper here, or a slightly more precise way. And I know this is in pretty good shape anyway. So slightly more precise way is to use a piece of wood and keep this at 90 degrees and just clean up that edge. So this is a ceramic stone. These are those ones that were donated to us by Norton, and they're really nice. I've been using it at home. I've been getting some chisels, working on some chisels and stuff for the sharpening class, and they do have their place in a shop. I really would like a pair, but a little pricey. So I've got, as you can see, I'm using the wood here, and I'm going to the ultra fine. That's equivalent to about 8,000. What I want to do is not go too coarse a grit. So I'll see how it performs there. If I need to go back to the 1,000 grit here, I will. But let's just work that a little bit and I'll see. Yeah, it's got, I don't know if you can see there. There you go, the light caught it. You can see those little ridges there. So that's just something that's happened. So I'm going to go to the 1,000 grit. Here we go. A little bit of aqua. And this won't take much. Almost completely done it with a couple of strokes. Do you want to move your camera? Is it easier for you to do that?
Get in there to focus now about something like that.
Yeah. You see, it's cleaning it up. I'll work it a little bit more. Again, you want to watch when you're doing this, don't rock it back and forth. You want to make sure that edge remains straight because it's critical. Just take your time, move it around the diamond plate so you don't wear any one point out. Or you could be using a 1,000 grit stone, but now you're going to be wearing a groove in it. Very nearly there. Pretty darn close. I'm going to go up to the equivalent of about a 3,000 grit in that ceramic now. There you go. See, at least you're getting some reflection off of that. You know, again, the critical part is this edge right here. So this doesn't have to be super polished. I'm going to polish it though. All right. If not a perfect polish, a pretty good polish. That's all I need. I'm not looking to cut anything with this. So finally, I'm actually going to just knock off that edge again, that little arris right there where it goes, just so that it doesn't cut anything. And then I'm going to set that aside. Put that over these parts over here, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, now when a low angle or a bevel up low angle blade doesn't have a chip breaker, this cap iron is effectively your chip breaker, or at least should not be getting in the way of the shaving curling up. So what we want to do is flatten that back edge. You can see that I've already flattened and polished that a few years ago, and it's remained, broadly speaking, pretty good. There we go. Lovely. You can see that it's not too bad. So again, I'm going to go to the 4,000 stone, and I can use water with this if I want. What I do find is if I use water on a ceramic stone every now and again, it helps to clean it up. You then wipe off all of this black stuff, because when you get a buildup of this is iron, and it fills the gaps between the granules. And so I'm going to place this with pressure on the front edge, because that's what I want to be flat. Let me work it a little bit on that coarser grit. And that's looking better. There's a couple of little spots here on the edge that I'm going to actually file a little bit with sandpaper, 400 grit sandpaper. I will tell you this one is the one I keep for the coarser work. So there are actually a couple of little spots there that need work. But again, it's not a cutting blade. Can you see? You can at least see an inconsistency in there's a little ding here. So I probably need to work this a little bit more and get that. The key to it is to make sure that there's no rough edges here. So a nice curved edge like that is what we need. And I can even, do a sort of a curved pull, as it were, on there. But just want for this edge that is touching the blade here to be fully engaged with the blade, with no gaps between it and the blade. Oh, I'm sorry. With no gaps between it. Oh, wrong way up as well. So we're there. So again, clean that up. It looks like a minor thing, but it really makes a big difference. And then there's we'll move on to the blade in a minute. So the parts here that might need a little working would be, if this is working too loose, you might want to close this rivet up with a hammer. As I mentioned before, this little fork here, you can tighten that up. This is an opposite thread, so be careful when you take it to pieces. It is an opposite thread, and you can cross your threads accidentally putting it back together. So you don't want to do that. Okay, but the big thing to look at here is to remember that we have the bevel up blade, and the back of this blade is polished and should be reasonably flat. So I need to set that in there. Now the blade actually sits on this point, this flat area here, and this area here. And that's all it sits on. And it's also held in place with the cap iron by this screw once that's tightened up. But what we need to do is to have these. So again, you want to hold it up to the light, move the lateral adjustment away, and maybe if I turn it upside down, does that That kind of gives you the view. What I'm looking for is to make sure that I have a nice straight line. Maybe it'll show better on the other side between these two surfaces. So I'll look at that. And if that looks like it's out of angle, then I'm going to have to, if that there where the end of my thumb is then I would have to sand or file it a little here, and then the same with that edge here. But I would come in from underneath with a file or sandpaper, clean that up. Don't do too much to it because it was originally machined to be reasonably flat, but just get it nice and clean. And there's not a whole lot to do more with this. You know, you look at it, make sure that there's no heavy cracks. You might want to lubricate this thread a little bit with a dry lube, preferably, because you don't want grease and oil around your woodwork if you can avoid it. So now that we know that if I've got a flat blade and these surfaces are interacting, and these, let me show you a different. No, I'll show you later. No, I demonstrated this already. This is the difference between the old Stanley designs and Lee Nielsen's modification of the design. You'll notice there's no lateral adjustment, which means there's one less thing to wear out. But look at what the back of the blade sits on, apart from the fact that the blade is very thick compared to the Stanley blade. The back of the blade sits on a flat surface that also registers up here. So I can put that on there and test all angles and see that everything is in line. There we go. You can sort of see that. So I can check that. And then, so this is the difference is this flat bed here helps to cut down on movement of this blade, and it gives it something to register and be really tight against. So it improves the quality of the performance. So I keep this particular one basically for very fine shavings. I keep it very sharp, and I keep it for fine shavings, and then I use this baby for more coarse stuff. So the next step, so I think I've done everything to my body. Any questions about working on the body? No? Okay, great. At least I can see that there aren't any questions. Oh, talking of which, you remember the last session we had? I jumped on a stool that I had just made. This is the finished article. I just went home and actually mostly I tried using a trebuchet, and I found that carving gouges were much better with the redwood. So anyway, it's going to sit outside, and this is where I sit and watch my dogs to see if they've done their business in the yard, and wait to clean it up. Because that my function as a human is primarily cleaning up after dogs. So the next thing that I'm going to do is focus on my blade. And there's a couple of things I want to do is I want to look at the blade. I want to be sure that the backside is flat. This is true for any blade. So you can see it's already got a polish on, because this is the part that I sharpen regularly. It's kept, you know, I tend to do a little bit of tune-up work every time I take a plane to pieces and sharpen it. But what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to go to the equivalent of 8,000 grit. So you can't see it there. There you go, 8,000 grit. The absolute ultra fine ceramic stone. And I'm going to once again use my Sharpie. Now, you all know that with a plain blade as opposed to a chisel blade, the only part that absolutely should be polished, has to be polished, is right up close to the blade here. And the reason is because on a normal plane, you've got an iron there, you've got the chip breaker sitting on there. So the only part of the blade that's exposed to the shavings is that tiny little bit. So that's the only part that actually has to be polished. I'm a bit persnickety, as you might have guessed, and I like to polish a bit further than that. But for these purposes, that's all I'm looking for. So I'm going to start with the superfine grit because I got a nice polish on this. I don't want to start putting new scratches on there if I don't have to. So I'm just going to see what happens when I run that back and forth. And you can see that in this case, I've got everything that I need. There you go. That might give you a better. Do you see now? You got a nice polish on the back, and
No Sharpie.
Hmm?
No Sharpie left.
no Sharpie left, which is the important bit, except back here. Usually you get a U shape, so you will have the edges. I'm gonna just work it a little bit more because I see a little Sharpie on these far edges here. It doesn't matter too much, but I'm gonna do it. It's only gonna take a moment. And this is like you make a cup of coffee, set aside an hour or a little longer, and work this, and you get good results. Now there's some, because it's an old blade, there is some little pitting that was there when I bought the blade, and I don't want to wear this blade down, but the pitting is back of the cutting edge, so it's not going to affect my cutting edge. So now I look at the edge itself. It's got a polish on it. It's not bad. It's, you know, it's in use. But what I'm going to do is show you how I would restore the angle on this. I couldn't find the little brass angle tester that I normally use, so I couldn't bring it with me today. But this is a 25-degree blade, so I've already preset my jig for sharpening. I've preset it at 25 degrees. So I'm going to put the guide or the jig on. Now, those of you who haven't come across this particular blade honing or sharpening jig, it's cute. It's really nice.
It is.
This piece here makes the world of difference to your setup. So I've got it in. I've loosened the pieces. I'm sharpening this, so I don't need to worry about damaging my blade against pieces of metal, so I can push it through here. And what this baby does is I have preset this for 25 degrees, this little clip. So I just push my blade up against that there, and then I push it against this edge, which is at 90 degrees. And then I set the clamp that holds the blade in place. Now the clamp doesn't hold it perfectly in place. And if you use things like narrow chisels, you may need to use an adapter. Now, just in looking away, look what I've done to it. There's a huge gap there. It's moved a lot. So just in tightening that up, I got to be checking on my positions at all times. What happened, I think, was that I tightened it up too much on one side. And if you do that, what happens is it'll twist or not set right or be slightly angled. So I want to just tighten that down there just to finger tight, and then go a little further, little further, little further, little further. Okay, so now I know I've got it set for 25 degrees. I should have that at a perfect 90-degree angle. I can take my guide off. Comes off nice and easily. And now, just to double check, I'm going to put my square on the edge of the blade and on this edge of the guide, and I can see, sure enough, that I've got no gap. If I hold that up to the light, there's no gap there, so that means it's square. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to the finest possible that I think it might need. So I'm going to go to 1000, so the medium. And because this isn't a jig now, I can safely move it back and forth. If it weren't in a jig, if I were trying to do this freehand, my tendency would be, as I push it back and forth, to push this up and create a rounded edge on where I'm trying to create a sharp edge. So I'm going to keep my fingers on the blade, one either side there, and if you're able to, put one in the middle and just work that back and forth.
Interesting. Well, I see it's putting a new edge on that edge. I'm going to put a Sharpie on here so that you guys can see what happens. I may even have to go back to the 300 on this. We'll have to see. So I've Sharpied the whole of that front edge of the bevel there. And you can see that this is set at 25%. So over the years, it's changed slightly. I mean, 25 degrees. And it may be slightly out of square as well, but it's cutting unevenly across there, which is a sign that it's out of square, which sure enough it is. So it's the side that's pushing forward, or the most is getting ground the most here. So I'm actually going to go back to the 300 because there's no point in me working twice as hard or 3 times as hard to remove just as much metal. So back to the 300. Again, I try to use all of the diamond plate. It's beginning to grind more on that edge than it is on here. So I'm going to just work this for a minute or two. And I just switched so we're back on 300 grit here. I just switched the plate around every few strokes so that I don't wear out unevenly on one side. This is where you have some music on that just fits with the rhythm that you're working. We're kind of running low on time. So I'm not going to be able to go through the whole thing, but if we get a close up there, you can see that there is still some black here. So we got a little ways to go in terms of removing metal, and you'll see that it's removing more metal from this side than it is on that side. That's good because it's returning it to square. So in essence, this corner is poking more forward. This is my right corner. It's poking more forward than my left corner. So it's grinding more off of there. So that's going to end up at square. You don't want to keep you guys beyond 11 o'clock. But something to point out is that there is now a pencil burr on the back of the blade, which means I've achieved a sharp edge. It's just not a square sharp edge. And you only get a degree or two of adjustment in a regular plane. You get far less than that in a block plane. So you really want this edge to be square. And that explains why the performance of this particular plane has been going down, is because I haven't been getting it really well tuned up. So I've neglected it. So probably another 5 minutes or so is going to get me to having a complete edge across here. It's not that I want to be, it's not that I specifically want to remove all of that material, but that's the way for me to get to square. So that's what I'm going to do. So
you get the jig for? How much?
These come from Veritas, or they're made by Veritas in Canada, and they are approximately, I think they're around the $90, $100 range, and you can buy them from Lee Valley. I got mine on eBay. And you can also buy a really nice adapter, which is the camber adapter, so that for smoothing planes, so you can put a little bit of a camber on your plane with ease. So yeah, so once I've done that, once I've got this to even all the way across, then I would flip it over, work it on the 1000, and then I would take it to the 8000 grit and clean off the back of the blade there. We've already polished the back, so all I got to do is remove that burr, which I do usually by it's called backing off. You work backwards like that. You may have to switch over the blade. But that's at the end. Now, let me take this one and show you the final step, right? Because once I've got this through the 1000, through the 8000, I've got a nice polished bevel. I've got a sharp edge, and I've removed that burr. I then have a sharp edge. But the problem with that edge is that it's at 25 degrees, and that makes it a little bit, what's the word? There's a word for it, fragile, is it? It means the edge will break down easily. So in order to get more durable performance out of the blade, what we do is we go up, and I can show you actually on this blade. I don't have to dismantle this blade. Once I'm done with that, this point, all I've been doing is shaping the blade, creating the right shape. I haven't really sharpened it until I get to the 1000. Once I get to the 8000, then yes, I've fully sharpened it and it's ready to go. And then what we do, and I usually will be doing this here, on no more than a 1000 grit, and you'll be able to see it on this blade, is we take that 25-degree angle that it was set at and go up just a little bit. I've trained my body to this angle, and a little bit more. And I've now put a tiny little micro bevel on this front edge. So it's probably no more than 0.5 millimeter thick, if that. You probably can't see it with the resolution of this camera, but right on the edge there, I've got a little tiny micro bevel at about 37 degrees. So now on my ultra fine, I'm going to back it off, and I could see that pencil burr. I don't know if you can, but I could, when I did that backwards movement, the pencil burr flipped over. So now it's on this side. So now I'm going to go. Yeah, I got polish on that edge. And I now have another little tiny pencil burr here. And that's how you can feel if you've actually got a sharp edge, is the burr all the way across on the back of the blade. So I'm going to take that off. Do these just lightly until that pencil burr falls off, leaving me with a perfect edge. Hasn't come off yet. And that would appear to have come off. And you can see the real test as to how sharp a blade is to do it across end grain. You hear that cut? That means even though this blade is not square, I have sharpened it. So if I'd have gotten that to square, then that would be sufficient for my for tuning that up. So then, now that I've done everything, I would reassemble the plane. So making sure I put it in the right way up and remembering which notch I had it in there, because these as the plane wears, they have notches to allow for it. Put the plane back in. I haven't actually put the shoe in, so let's do that. So we got a nice clean edge on this shoe. I really love this little plane. It's use it a lot. And it's one that, because I don't have a lot of money invested in it, I don't feel like I have to treat it really carefully. So this would be the one I'd take to a wood yard. See if that's going to go in there. One notch further down. Okay. Okay, so let's see if I can even get anything out of it, even though I've not got a square blade. Might be within tolerances. Too far in. It never quite goes how you plan. I didn't have this in the best place. Okay, baby's moving. Oh, one last thing. Before you put this whole thing together, give yourself a little protection against the rust. This is camellia oil. You can use jojoba oil if you happen to have any at home. And just go over the exposed metal parts of the plane and wipe a little camellia oil or whatever it is. Do you see how that has already started to rust? In the short time we've been here, it's been sitting there with a little bit of damp. It's been on this mat. So you got to keep an eye on that stuff. It's amazing how quickly things start to rust. So this camellia oil is really good because it sets hard. And you can even put it on the other parts that might get exposed to the atmosphere as well. So back on my table, put it in the right way. Just beginning to come through the bottom of the plane. Okay, so that is coming through. Let's see if the lateral adjustment will give me what I need. There we go. Yeah. I think we'll be able to get that to work. I'm not going to put the vise back on. Oh, how stupid of me. I didn't tighten up the shoe. I'm going to hope in, you know what, of getting it right with that. All right, that's somewhat close. Let me clamp something in place here. We'll see if it even works. I'm sorry I wasn't able to do the whole thing. It was maybe a bit more time consuming than I thought it was going to be. But you get the general idea. You know, this is a rough edge. So this hasn't even been jointed, this edge yet. It's just been sawed in the yard. A very heavy cut. Going the wrong way. This one, because of its reverse thread, always gets me confused. I'd like to sharpen them up, adjust them, and try and keep them that way. Okay, we'll move that shoe in a little bit. Those are actually fairly thin shavings. I'd probably mess with this and get it a little more coarsely set. But to give you an example, one that's reasonably well set up. If I could get this baby out again. We're over time, aren't we? Okay, well, not everything always goes perfectly. That seems to be a pretty good rule in woodwork as well. I think it's time for me to quit. So anyway, there you go. That's tuning up a block plane. There's an article in this month's Fine Woodworkers. If you trust me at this point, you are welcome to contact me if you want any further tips. But it's fun, this messing with hand tools. And by the way, there are some hand tools I just can't tune up. I've got to find someone who knows a lot more than I do, because I got so frustrated with one I sold it on eBay this week. And it was a nice plate as well, but I'd had enough. So, any other questions, comments?
Hello, is anybody there?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Paul. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot,
I
Pat.
just saw you on mute, Doug, but I don't know if your microphone's working.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Can hear you fine.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Paul, for your tutelage this week.
No,
We can't hear you, Mike.
can't hear you. I'm sorry. Maybe our speakers down.
No, we have.
Set up professional audio in audio
Yeah,
settings.
well,
Well, we can't hear you, but you can hear us, I think. And I wish you a very good, it's either a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, I'm not sure which. But I'll look forward to seeing you next time. And we'll try and get some publicity about it out ahead of time. Cool. I wish we could hear you. Oh, well done. Oh, that one didn't go as well as I like, but who cares? Nobody's, I do care.
Okay, are we done?
Yes, we're done. Okay. But it's interesting.